Shalom, welcome to this week's edition of the Pilichowski Page on video, where we present news for advocates for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, especially those teenagers out there, but really everyone can gain from a news update. Okay, our top story, obviously, unfortunately, is still Iran, because as of yet, they have yet to change their minds about acquiring a nuclear weapon and trying to annihilate the Jewish people and the entire state of Israel. President Obama has tried diplomatically to reach out to the Iranian people on a number of occasions, and it's his efforts and their response that we'll concentrate at first on this morning. First, President Obama said that their diplomacy is his goal, and that is a strategy of his to find a diplomatic solution, i.e. talking to President Ahmadinejad or the Iranian people or the Ayatollahs and convincing them that trying to acquire a nuclear weapon is not a good idea. President Obama did warn, though, on the eve of a summit that's currently going on in Seoul, South Korea today, about nuclear weapons, that window for diplomacy is closing. And it's not an eternal window, that whenever the Iranian people want to take advantage of it, they can. Right now is the time for them to come to talks and for them to come to a decision along with the rest of the world about their nuclear aspirations. Once that window closes, the president has said that all options are on the table, including military options, to stop Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. At the same time, President Obama sent Iranian New Year wishes. It's the New Year in Iran around this season, and he sent New Year's greetings to the Iranian people. In response, the Ayatollah, and who knows if he planned this or not, or this was something that he had in mind beforehand, but a few moments after President Obama sent his New Year greetings, the Ayatollah came out and made a proclamation that anyone that attacks the Iranian people, they will respond in kind, specifically mentioning the Israelis and the Americans. So the diplomacy seems to be going in one direction here and is not being returned. There's something called Inner Look, which is a war game that America plays. This is where the United States military sets various factors into a computer program, combines it with human knowledge, and watches what happens when they set certain scenarios into motion. This is to better prepare the military for scenarios that they might not have thought might come about, and also prepare them for most likely scenarios. The scenario they put into these war games was one of where Israel attacks Iran and what would happen. And the war game scenario came out not in a good way for the United States, as it predicted that immediately Iran would retaliate against the United States ship in the Strait of Hormuz, killing 200 sailors. This puts America in a precarious position where they might be drawn into a war. That's and a war not of their making. So this put people on I guess you could say alert that if the Israelis do attack, America could be drawn into the war, which you could take as different analysts take as a way that maybe America should preempt an attack against Iran in order to avoid being surprised, or at the same time helping Israel with the attack, or maybe making sure maybe Israel doesn't attack. Either way, that's how the war game came out, and analysts are taking it in different ways. At the same time, a report came out in an Egyptian newspaper that two Egyptians were being paid 50 million Egyptian pounds to attack one Israeli ship inside the Suez Canal, which is a waterway between Egypt and on the way to Israel. Then that money was coming from Iran. So Iran, again, always with their hands behind the scenes in terrorism, again, planning on attacking an Israeli ship in the Suez Canal. At the same time, we're finding that even with the Iranians proclaiming over and over that their nuclear program is for energy, the Arab world is not buying it. And the Arab world is separating themselves from the Iranians, seeing themselves as power grabbers and trying to dominate the Arab world. Okay, switching focus from Iran to the United Nations Human Rights Council. The United Nations Human Rights Council is a farce. It's a joke of human rights. Such illustrious human rights practices such as Iran and Syria and China sit on this council. They're sending a fact-finding mission to Israel to see how settlers disturb the human rights of the quote-unquote Palestinians that sit in the Yehuda and Shomron, what the world refers to as the West Bank. Israel said that this is a complete and total farce, and that they are the only country of all the human rights violators in the world to having a standing agenda item on the United Nations Human Rights Council's meetings that they have, and that this fact-finding mission is nothing more than an anti-Semitic and anti-Israel ploy to harm the Jewish people. They refuse to participate, and not only that, but Avigdor Lieberman, the foreign minister, is considering heavily pulling out of the United Nations Human Rights Council, and Israel will no longer participate in their meetings. Switching our focus back to Egypt, Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, acting on behalf of the administration, has a waiver when Congress passes certain laws affecting national security. The administration is able to, most of these laws are passed with the waiver that the administration can set aside the law for national security interests. Congress passed a law that they wanted to see certain benchmarks, certain measures met by the new Egyptian government on their road to democracy before they transfer the next installments of their $1.3 billion annual aid to the Egyptians. The Egyptians were waiting to see if America would transfer that money, and although the Egyptians have not reached those benchmarks, the Obama administration under Hillary Clinton's direction, or I should say the other way, Hillary Clinton under President Obama's direction, took advantage of the waiver and transferred the $1.3 billion to the Egyptian people, citing national security interests, that if we do not transfer that money and that aid to the Egyptians, that could put Israel in a precarious situation and America in a precarious situation, and therefore that money has to be transferred even though the benchmarks set by Congress have not been met. This week we also saw the start of a tragedy in Washington with the J Street Convention. What is J Street? J Street is an organization that proclaims itself to be a pro-Israel, pro-peace lobby. Unfortunately, there are countless examples where they've stood against Israel during their existence. They're seen as the arch enemy of AIPAC, which itself is an issue. And this week they have their convention in Washington. The Obama administration has sent representatives that have warned yesterday that all this talk of Iran could put the diplomatic, all those hopes of attacking Iran could put the diplomatic mission to Iran at risk. And Iran might not want to participate in diplomatic talks while the rest of the world is talking about a possible military strike against Iran, and therefore they asked to quiet the talk about Iran and its nuclear ambitions. It also sets aside gas prices, and what seems to me is a veiled threat. They say more continued talk by the Israeli government and by the American people about an Iranian threat could drive a wedge in the United States-Israel relationship, something we hoped never to hear